The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Barnes. I make up 1/3 of the candidate development team, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar today entitled Job Searching for Introverts. As you all can see, we have three facilitators today that will be joining us for our discussion, and we will hear more about them in a moment. But before we get into introductions, I'd like to talk about the webinar outcomes and overview. That you all can see at the very top. Something that we do want you to take away from this presentation will be the ability to define introversion as well as general examples, or give general examples of what being an introvert is, but also be able to discuss methods to re-energize oneself in a highly active environment. And then last but not least, be able to articulate the benefits of being introverted in the job market. And that's really important, especially you'll see when you're on site. Because sometimes when people, especially extroverts, when they hear introvert, they automatically assume the worst, and that's not actually the case a lot of times. So that's a really good point to express. But in regards to the actual overview, a general overview of the presentation slides, this is the order we'll be doing in. So we'll first, they'll be discussing the definition of introversion as well as giving general examples. They'll then go into talking about energy, and then navigating the on-site event space in San Antonio, selling introverted talents, and then other tips, tricks, and advice. Before we continue, I do want to encourage you all to submit questions. So you can submit questions throughout the entire presentation, and then I will try my best to answer your questions. And then at the very end, we will also announce your questions and give the presenters a chance to go ahead and answer your questions as well. Also, this presentation will be, or is currently being recorded, and so we will place it on our YouTube channel within a week. So for those of you who have to leave early, who maybe have some questions, you can go ahead and submit those questions and log on to our YouTube channel to hear the answers to those questions. Or for those of you who already don't have questions but just want to hear the rest of the presentation, you'll be able to do so within the week when we upload it to YouTube. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to our presenters to tell you more about who they are, and we will go from there. So they will also tell you not just their name, but their professional background, their current position and institution, and then also their experience in regards to working with introversion as well within the job search. So I guess we can go ahead and start with Kendra.
Okay, hi, my name is Kendra Bumpus, and my professional background is predominantly in university housing. I did my undergraduate degree at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, my graduate work at Ohio State. I've worked professionally at Arizona State, Clemson, and I'm currently here at Florida State as an assistant director within university housing, specifically working with administration and operations. My experience working with introversion, I actually present on it fairly regularly. I have presented regionally, I've even presented at Kuhawai, and really kind of applied some of those pieces to the job searching. And so what I mean by that is I had some tips and tricks for colleges and universities when they were trying to recruit on how to make a little bit more friendly of an environment for us introverts.
My name is Samantha. I'm sorry? My name is Samantha.
Go ahead.
I am one of the assistant directors of residential life at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I did my undergraduate work at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my master's at Virginia Tech. I also worked for 4 years professionally as a hall director at Virginia Commonwealth University before starting my assistant director role last year. My experience in working with introversion and job searching is I am an introvert. I've gone through a number of job searches. I also supervise a few introverts, and so working with them through that process as well.
everyone, my name is Jen Bannon. I currently serve as an Associate Director of Residence Life at Purdue University in the very cold and very snowy state of Indiana. I did my undergraduate work at Ball State. I did my master's work at NC State. I've worked at Ball State and at Virginia Tech. Those are the two places I was at prior to coming to Purdue. My position here at Purdue, I have the coolest job ever is what I tell people. I get to work with training, I get to work with selection, I get to work with student leadership, and I get to work with all of our professional recruitment stuff. So I have the opportunity of doing a lot of different things that I love and get really excited about. With my experience with working with introversion and job searching, I am a gigantic introvert. I've also gone through some pretty intensive and pretty stressful job searching processes, and so I have the opportunity to be published in some of my writing when it comes to introversion and job searching, giving candidates tips, as well as also pushing and challenging the status quo at institutions and what they expect of on-campus interviews to see if we're making people not be successful by how we ask them to act when they come on campus.
So now I'll turn it over to the panel to begin the presentation.
Sure. So when it comes to introversion, really what we're talking about is the definition you're going to see there on the screen. Introversion really directing one's interest inward or to things within the self. I'd like to point out that does not mean that we are selfish in any way, but more that is where we live. We tend to live in our own heads a little bit at times. You know, our thoughts, our energy, and we'll get to that a little bit later, are directed inwards. And really we reflect and are concerned with thoughts and feelings as opposed to a bit more of the external environment. So introversion. Again, if you're reading these statements and you say, yes, that is me, congratulations, you might be an introvert. When it comes to thinking about, you know, where you get energy, when you deal with the ideas, the pictures, the memories, the reactions in your head, that's definitely an introverted trait. I like to think of my introversion, because introversion can look different for different people, but for me, it's kind of that inner monologue that is constantly in the background. I like to think of it a little bit more in it's the voiceover in a good TV show. The statements of, you know, I'm reflective, some people may say reserved. If you are comfortable with being alone or even with silences, again, those are all very basic introvert traits. I know that when Samantha and I met to talk a little bit yesterday, in our 25-minute conversation, probably a good half of that was sitting in silence, just trying to understand, trying to ensure we knew where each other was coming from, and, you know, even forgetting maybe even to check in with one another, really trying to make sure that we had our thoughts straight to run through pieces of the webinar. So when you think about introversion, a lot of people think you're either an introvert or an extrovert. It's really more of a scale. You know, when you take the MBTI, if you ever have done so, you will hear about, you know, which you tend to lean towards. So don't try to necessarily compare introverts and extroverts. It's more the qualities associated with that. I would also say that there is also the ambivert. So I know there's not necessarily a ton of information out there on ambiverts, but and also not the focus of today, but you know, that is also a piece on that spectrum. I know it says extroverted world. I like to think of this as more of an extroverted U.S. culture, specifically our student affairs culture. If you look in some areas of your division of student affairs, you're going to find a lot more extroverts tend to be gravitated towards certain positions. But, you know, any introvert or extrovert can do any of the jobs just as well as one another. I know that a lot of times introverts get kind of pigeonholed as, you know, oh, they're the shy folks, you know, they don't like to talk to people. Honestly, that's not necessarily the case. Some people are shy, some people are not shy. If you have ever read the book Quiet, you know that you can have a shy extrovert or a shy introvert. It applies to either or, because again, it's a bit of a spectrum. Sometimes people don't like to talk to people, and that's okay. We are in a people-helping profession, so I would say that obviously we do talk to people. We may just have to gear ourselves up for it a little bit more. You know, definitely trying to ensure that we have provided ourselves with enough space and enough time to ensure that we are good in our heads before we are good externally as well. One piece that I like to think about with introversion is we're really good conversationalists. Our conversation just happens to be a lot more one-on-one than necessarily large groups. Large groups can sometimes really take it out of you. And so when it comes to job searching, in particular, when you are having that dialogue across the table in that interview setting, make sure that you control that narrative around the areas where you're the expert, which hopefully will be for the folks interviewing. That's you. The topic is a one-on-one great conversation about you, and hopefully you're the expert in you.
So we thought this was a great illustration of inside the heads of an introvert. Sometimes I listen to an extrovert talk and I'm like, wow, you process that so quickly. But then when I get my thoughts together, as you can see. So for extroverts, there's a stimulus, it's quickly processed by the brain, they're on top of it, and they're able to put their thoughts together. That's not always how I feel. I feel like I have to take a beat and process that information, and so you can see how it kind of goes to the top and to the right, and things get a little squiggly because that's the way that we process the information, and so before we're able to put our thoughts together. And so that's not always a linear thought, and so for me, I know I have to catch myself and saying, like, okay, so I am at point A, and then all of a sudden I'm at point F, and people are like, okay, but how did you get there? I know sometimes, especially in job interviews, it's really important to take a step back and breathe and think about how we're processing and explaining the process, how we process information. And that's also a really good selling point because, as we're going to talk about, and as Kendra already mentioned, introverts are really good conversationalists, really good one-on-one, and so it's about relaxing and explaining how information is processed by our brains as we get our thoughts together to present our answers in an interview. So switching gears a little bit, we've talked about it being an introvert and what that means, but as we gear up for the placement exchange, it's taking a minute to figure out, you know, where do I get my energy from? An introvert's energy comes from being alone, being with your thoughts, that reflective nature that Kendra discussed. And so it's not that, I feel like for me it's not that I can't be around people, but it's like I need to take a moment and be by myself alone with my thoughts in order to center and ground myself. And that's very much how I felt when I was at the placement exchange as a candidate. And so it's recharging your battery. The placement exchange is a very active setting. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of people around. There are a lot of different questions that you're going to get. And so how do you recharge your battery, and what does that look like for you? And so I would encourage you to spend some time in reflection as we gear up for TPE. Think about what are you doing after class to recharge, or what are you doing after a big dinner party to recharge, and then how are you going to implement those strategies for TPE in that setting. And so and we'll talk through some strategies in a moment about how you can do that. And so what is being an introvert and navigating the on-site event? What does that look like? A big piece is planning and being prepared. What does your schedule look like? Being realistic about how much you can handle every day. And so when you start getting interview offers and you start reaching out to employers to say, hey, I'd like to interview with you, is it realistic for you to be able to do 7 interviews in one day? I know for me, that wasn't something that I was able to do. So I came up with a plan of what is my max every day, and I left a little bit of wiggle room in case I came across an opportunity on site, or if a candidate reached out to, or an employer reached out to me, then I would be able to have some wiggle room. But for the most part, I stuck with my plan. Going in, I said, this is how much I'm going to be able to do every day. But for that recharge time, one thing that I did that I would encourage you to think about is if I had a 30-minute interview, I blocked the next 30 minutes. If I had an hour interview, I blocked the next hour. That gave me time to decompress, to be alone, to think about how that interview went, how I felt about it, if I wanted to continue through their process, because it's just as much you interviewing them as they are interviewing you. And so also taking advantage of the quiet candidate workroom. That's a great space for you to put in some headphones. It's very few people, in my experience, have used the candidate workroom, and so it was really just a good space for you to just be there, be quiet, still be around a couple of people, and so that is also a really great resource. And so the other thing to think about is verbalizing your needs to your friends and colleagues. So if you're going with people that are in your cohort or that you know from another institution and you need to not go to dinner with them, that's okay. Or if you come back to your hotel because you're rooming with them and you say, I really just need 30 minutes of just quiet, making sure that you're with people that will respect that and before they start asking you about every detail of every interview that you had that day. The other big thing is attending socials, and I know for me, I struggle with that. The small talk, it just doesn't always feel great. It doesn't feel genuine to me. So how I do that without feeling phony is I find the person that I interviewed with or that I had met in the hallway just to check in and see how they were doing, get a feel for the room, and then you can start branching out and meeting other people.
So I know a lot of people probably had questions about, so how do I sell my introverted talents? And, you know, in really thinking about this the last, you know, little bit here, I think there are a lot of great pieces that come with being introverted. Most importantly, I think you don't need to apologize for being introverted. I have seen a number of folks who actually do that, and I think hopefully at least our panelists today can say there's no need to. There are successful introverts in student affairs. There are successful introverts in every aspect of student affairs. So, you know, don't feel like you need to apologize for them, for how you gain energy and for the talents that you have. Definitely talk about how you use the introverted pieces of your strengths, both as a strength or as in literal strength, but also when you're talking and using strength plus language. So being able to speak to how that applies. So, you know, I am a input person. You know, I enjoy being thoughtful. You know, that is one of the strengths that comes with being introverted. I can easily be in my head being thoughtful, and I gather a lot of information. Again, making those one-on-one connections. When you think about all the interactions that come with students, in some aspects and in some positions, yes, there are lots of big group work. But when you're talking about a student in crisis or when you're talking about a student who needs assistance, that's a one-on-one connection, and that's an introvert specialty. If I can coin that phrase, I would. You know, when I think about the best interviews that I've had, it really has felt like a really great one-on-one conversation. And so when it comes to, you know, the two-on-one across the table, have a good conversation, make that connection, because that's what you know that you can do, and have confidence in that. Introverts do tend towards strategic thinking. We're long-range planners a lot of times. And it's totally, and I would say especially, something to talk about because, again, strategic thinking, being strategic, that goes with the Strengths Quest language that is prevalent in the student affairs world right now. One piece that I really appreciate about being introverted is sometimes all the external stimuli, all that generalist pieces, can be a little bit overwhelming. So I've chosen to become a little bit more of an expert in a few things. I can do everything. Hear me say that. Hear me say that confidently. But I choose to spend my time and my energy being an expert in these certain areas. That's a great way to answer the question when somebody asks, you know, so what is it that you like to do? Or tell me about, you know, your favorite parts of the job. Well, I can do any part of this job, and here's why I say that. So here are the things where I really feel like an expert. Or here's where I really like to spend my energy and my talents. There is always a role on a team for an introvert, an extrovert, an ambivert, and anybody anywhere else on the spectrum. I think that when it comes to what that means and how that plays out for you, being able to describe that is going to be key. If you say, well, I'm an introvert, so I'm quiet. Well, that doesn't really talk about your role on the team. If you say, you know, I'm a little bit more introverted, so that means I tend to take a little bit more of a step back on a team at first. Really, again, try to be thoughtful. I want to make sure I'm not seen as rude or put offish. And so I try to listen intently, make that one-on-one connection with the people on my team, and then come through with my opinion, my fact, my what have you, and that's how I contribute. Introverts do tend to be detail-oriented. That's not a mandate, though. Not everybody is, and that's okay. Again, it's all in how you present that. One great example is me personally. One of my strengths in Strengths Quest is command. As I say, you know, you're not going to see me at the front of the room barking orders saying, do this, do that, to a huge group. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to pull people aside and I said, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I'm great at taking in the information and giving my opinions and making a summary judgment, if you will, and running with it from there. And so, again, just making sure that you are speaking that strengths language and selling what that means for you as an introvert, take a little bit of time. That's totally okay. It's something that they want to hear. As somebody who does recruiting, as somebody who, you know, definitely looks for different types of people to build my team, I'm not simply looking for folks, you know, always the folks who can be that extrovert at the top of the stage. I need somebody to run the curtains. I need somebody to make sure that the crowd is hyped, but I also need to make sure that, you know, we have somebody greeting them at the door. That, again, that little bit more of that one-on-one connection.
So other tips, tricks, and advice for the on-site event. Kendra and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, and when we got to the slide, we both were like, headphones. Had a nice laugh about it. And so if you've got a set of headphones, Kendra said that she's got a really nice set of noise-canceling headphones that she takes. And so even if that's not, if you're just have them on, you're not listening to any music, that's fine. I know that that's something that I would tend to do after an interview is just put in my headphones. And so I really felt like it kind of gave me a little bit more space or breathing room to really decompress and relax and breathe. The other thing that I would say about headphones is if you've got a good pump-up song, go for it. I would listen to the song that our football team would run into for home games, and so it was just like a song that got everybody pumped up. I was just feeling good. I could take on the world. So those headphones came in really handy. Rooming. So I talked about this a little bit. I mean, if you can room by yourself, I know that that's not feasible for everyone, or if you can find another introvert. And again, if that's not the case, laying down some ground rules. I'm married to an extrovert, and they know that when we come home, to give me some time to decompress about my day before they start asking a bunch of questions. And so making sure that you are saying, like, here's what I need. As I was reflecting on this, I thought a big piece would be sticking to your routine. So if you are a stickler for eating breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at noon, dinner at 6:30, try to stick to that. If you like to wake up and work out, do your best to hit the hotel at the gym or go for a run. Stick to your routine as much as possible. I find that for me, that just makes me feel more relaxed, more in tune with myself, and that my routine's not all out of whack. And so that's something that when I travel, I make a conscious effort to try to do. If it's possible, consider turning off your work email. There's a lot that goes on on campus all the time, and so how are you able to disconnect? And if you're not able to fully disconnect, how are you communicating with your supervisor or other stakeholders to say, hey, I am at the placement exchange, here's what that means, and it's going to, I might not be able to respond because this is where my focus is. Pack snacks. I know for me, I don't do well if I get a little hangry, so pack some protein bars or anything that you can just quickly grab in between your interviews to make sure that you are at the top of your game. The other thing to think about is what are those invites that you need to take, and when is that good to pass? And so if you are invited to dinner with your friends and you are feeling tired and really just not feeling it, pass on that if you need to. But if you get invited to a social from an employer, it really sends a message that you're invested in that institution and that position when you show up. And so I would say for socials, if you get invited, have a plan for how you're going to navigate and network in that space. Also, side note, the rooms tend to be small and warm, so just have your plan in place. The other thing to think about in terms of exhaustion is if you are coming off of TPE and you are going right into NASPA, what does that look like? A lot of employers do stay for NASPA, and so you might run into them after TPE is over. And so how are you making sure that you have enough energy to go through that whole experience, because it is a long time. Kendra or Jen, do you guys have anything that you'd like to add to tricks, tips, and advice?
Yeah, definitely. I would say I think the obligatory invites versus when to pass is key and was crucial for me. I did not take my introversion into account the first time I went through TPE, and when I got invited to a social, I was so worn out that I didn't find myself able to make very good conversation. That can, I wouldn't say make or break, but it definitely, I think, plays a factor. You want to be able to be personable when you go. And so, you know, I'm a little bit more of a shy introvert. I get very nervous. So when it comes to meeting new people, again, I took exactly what you said earlier, Samantha. I beelined for the folks that with whom I interviewed. Definitely struck up that conversation, and that helped the conversation flow a bit more. They did the really great recruiter thing, which was then they introduced me to other people so I could continue that conversation with others. And I remembered that I didn't have to wow the whole room. I just needed to, again, be able to hold a good one-on-one, maybe even two-on-one conversation, and I knew that that was a strength that I could bring. I had that in the bag. Headphones, again, I think, as we talked about yesterday, I'm the queen of putting on my headphones, my noise reduction, and not plugging them into my phone even. I don't listen to anything, just the quiet. And that is a little space for me to just kind of get to relax, focus on what was in my mind so that way I can get it off of my mind. I think definitely if you have a rough interview, especially, making sure you take a walk, going through and taking some time for yourself. But I would also say a piece of advice is remember that there are also introverts at the table. So if you have a quote-unquote bad interview, it's not necessarily you, and it's definitely not because of your introversion. Maybe it's a bad fit, or maybe the person who's interviewing you is an introvert who's been on a long time as well. You know, we always try to take that into account when we can, whenever we interview, but again, remember, it's not always you. Sometimes it's them.
And I would just add, or I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was muted and I was trying to talk and then I realized I was muted and that wasn't effective. I think for me, one of the biggest pieces and what I try to share with staff I work with and even throughout the course of the interview day is that you're your only advocate and only you can be your best advocate through this whole process. And so I have a lot of respect at 6:30 on Friday night when a candidate says, you know what, I'm really tired. Like, I'm excited to interview with you, but it's been a really long day. Be honest with people. Like, I know and want to have staff that can own who they are and be very self-aware and to share, like, you know what, it's a lot of interviews, and I'm very much an introvert, and so I'm working through all this stuff and know how to articulate that to the people that you're interviewing with, because sometimes for those that aren't familiar, if you're tired or if it's been a long day, it's viewed as disengagement versus being the way that you are in processing through your day. And so remember at the end of the day, through all this job search stuff, that you're the only advocate that you have. And so figuring out how to best articulate that to everyone that you're interviewing with, because as an employer, I don't want happy and perky at the table and somebody who seems really outgoing and excited and all of the extroverted things, stereotypical things we see, and then I bring you to campus and you're vastly different. I want to see what I'm going to get if I hire you on my campus. And so make sure you know how to appropriately articulate who you are as you sit down in those interviews.
And I would just add, as a fellow introvert as well, some other things to take into account. As a fellow introvert who also went through TPE and was looking at housing positions, ended up in housing, one thing that's really important as you travel to San Antonio is make sure you are spacing out your interviews. And so I know from personal experience, I had like 12 interviews back to back to back, and that did not work out for me at all. And so if you know you just need to have like a moment to breathe and just like, you know, take a chance or an opportunity to just like relax, grab some water, maybe a snack, and walk around for a little bit, then do that. You know, so instead of you filling up your schedule completely, maybe space it out, you know, so that way you have half an hour breaks in between. Another thing that kind of coincides with that, so taking me time, quote unquote, is really important. So make sure that you are putting those breaks in there, but also make sure you have lunch, you know, because sometimes people can forget to take lunch and just try to, you know, hammer out as many interviews as possible. And I'm pretty sure that my colleagues who are facilitating can also agree to this, that, you know, you need to eat. You need to drink water as well and get your fluids in. So that's really important. But also when you do go to lunch, step away from the convention center. So you shouldn't be at the TPE Onsite in the building, I would say, when you go to lunch. Maybe step away, go back to your hotel room if it's close enough. Or in San Antonio has a lot of different restaurants downtown. They have the Riverwalk, you know, so you can go walk along the Riverwalk, or maybe go to a couple of different restaurants that are really close to the convention center. But step away from that space, because I know it can be very stressful to be in the TPE Onsite space because you're still on. And I'm not saying that you're not on when you're outside of that space, but you're not as on as you have to be when you are on TPE Onsite. And then also one thing that I did that was kind of helpful was I challenged myself by doing something outside of my box, and I would do it maybe once or twice a day. So I would challenge myself to step outside of that box of, being the quiet person, and maybe speak to people, different candidates or different employers, when I was in smaller spaces, like in the elevator or on escalators, just simply, say hi to people. You never know where that conversation can lead you. You never know who you're speaking to and how that person might be searching for candidates, and so you never know, or they might know people who are looking for candidates, and so that can really help you out as well. So that's some of the feedback that I had. Is there any other feedback from the panelists?
I think that was a great summary. Again, going back to being realistic about how many interviews that you can handle in a day. For me, it was really important creating a buffer. If I had a 30-minute interview, I blocked the next 30 minutes. If I had an hour interview, I blocked off the next hour. That way I was able to take a walk, get the snack, have the water, go to the bathroom, do what I needed to do to also be a person, and not this just a candidate, but taking care of myself. So think about those buffers and create those into your schedule.
Indeed, and so we do have some questions rolling in, so I'll go ahead and ask the first one. The first one's from Yasmin. They were just simply wondering if you all could provide some more suggestions in regards to navigating leadership positions as an introvert. So how do you sell yourself as an introvert to leadership positions?
For me, I think it's those relationships and the strength of those one-on-one connections. And so it's a lot of, I feel like for me it's a lot of groundwork. It's like Kendra said, not the person at the front of the room, but the behind-the-scenes person who's making sure that everything's flowing smoothly. And then you work hard, you build those relationships, and you get opportunities. People take notice. People in your department will start giving you more tasks to do. For me, we were short-staffed one year, and as a hall director, I ended up the chair of the RA training committee, a position that was usually held by an assistant director. But because we were short-staffed and I had those relationships, I did the groundwork, I worked hard, I was able to have an opportunity that other staff members didn't have. And so it's about using your strengths to set yourself apart and excelling in your own way, and that your success doesn't necessarily look the same as somebody else's. And so what are the goals that you're trying to accomplish? If you're trying to get from point A to point C, what opportunities and what things do you need to put in place to get you there? And how do you use those skills, like I said, those relationship building, those one-on-one connections to help get you there?
I think too, it's a lot about that self-awareness piece that I talked a little bit about, in terms of you have to know how to sell the experiences that you've had and not allow a part of who you are to be an excuse. So even with strengths, like I'm not a woo by any stretch. It's like number 39 or 100. Like I'm not a woo. It's far away. But I can't use not being able to woo people over and build those relationships as an excuse to not do my job well. So I think that self-awareness and finding examples of how you've utilized your introversion and coming up with how you can answer questions. And as an example, I had a staff member that I supervised at Virginia Tech when I was there, and she was, and Sam can attest to this, a gigantic extrovert. Like she had to process everything all the time. And as I talked with people in interviews about supervising her, I had shared, not in the most appropriate way, of, well, I would need to step away from the conversation. And the way that was perceived was very negative. So it's figuring out how to spin your introversion, like your need to process whatever that means for you, in a way that they're going to get it. Because in my head it made sense. Like, yeah, she would talk to me for an hour and a half and I couldn't even speak a word. And then I didn't know how to process through with her. So when I shared that in interviews, I didn't do it well, and so people thought I couldn't handle it. So it's about knowing you and knowing those experiences and figuring out how to articulate those for the people and the questions they're asking, if that made sense. I just said a lot of words. I'm sorry.
For me, I think I really had to rethink how I thought of leadership. So leadership for me doesn't always mean the person in front, because some of the best leaders I know lead from the middle of the pack. They're the folks who can rally the troops, but they know other people well enough to be able to speak to other people's strengths as well as their own strengths and weaknesses. Again, kind of going back to what Jen said, that self-awareness. And so being able to say, you know, I'm probably not the person that should give that presentation because I get so nervous. How about you give that presentation, but I'll set things up for you. I'll have this ready to go. I'll have that ready to go. When it does come to being in front, I think that then the game changes a little bit. But again, you still got to play to your strengths. So if you're a person who doesn't do well in large crowds, you know, how do you work on that? You may never master it, but how do you work on it? I mean, for me, presenting, believe it or not, I always used to open, welcome to my presentation, my biggest nightmare. Because again, I'm a little bit more of a shy introvert. But I love to do webinars. Why? No offense, but I can't look at any of the people listening to us today. I'm not as nervous sitting here looking at my computer screen watching as the presentation flips by. But it's still a great way to be able to still contribute to the profession. It's a great way to showcase some leadership skills, and it's a great way to be a resource to others.
All right, so we have some more that have just come in. So the next one is from Sophie, who wants to know how many interviews does a candidate have on an average TPE day? So I guess we can just break it down in the sense of how many, those of you who are facilitating right now, if you did attend TPE, how many average interviews do you have per day?
For me, oh, sorry, go ahead.
My last, I honestly, truly do not remember. It has been a while since I've been at TPE. Yeah, so I'm not going to be able to give a number. I'm sorry. It's been a long time, a very long time.
For me, I took a little bit of what Samantha did. So I would either schedule on the hour or the half hour. And I cut myself off right around dinner because I knew after that point either I wasn't going to be on my game as much as I would want to be, and I knew I wouldn't represent myself well. Or I would take part of the morning out because I'm not a morning person. And so I would balance it that way. I think that an average would be difficult to answer because again, it just depends on your energy level. If you find yourself in, you know, a couple of difficult interviews back to back to back, that may drain you for the rest of the afternoon. But if you have really great interviews, you may be good to go until 8 p.m. And so average, I think one thing that if I was in that position, what I would think of is how many student interactions if I was a student leader, or how many parent interactions if I was a professional, could I engage in a day and not end feeling like I had exhausted or depleted my energy resources, and I would start there for my number.
That's a great example, Kendra. I mean, for me, it is self-awareness. And so I'm not a morning person, but I don't do well at night either. But if you need something done between 10 and 4, I'm your person. And so that's when I tried to schedule most of my interviews. Like maybe the earliest was like 9:30, and the latest was like 4:30, because the people interviewing you are hungry too. For me, I still spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted. What was I looking for? I was looking for housing positions. Feels like there's a million of those. But like, what kind of institution was I looking for? What were their mission and values? And did those align with mine? And I think that while I was at TPE, because I had such a clear idea of what I was looking for, what I wanted that experience to be, I think I maybe did 13 to 15 interviews total. But I knew that I wouldn't be at the top of my game if I cast a net as wide as some of my peers. And so I spent a lot of time, like if I got, if somebody from a small private school reached out to me, I didn't feel obligated to have that interview because that wasn't the experience that I was looking for. And so it's being okay with saying, you know, no thank you, I really appreciate the offer, but it's not what I'm looking for right now. And then spending time spacing things out. So know yourself, know what you're looking for. And
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I said, and don't feel like you need to overdo it.
All right. I know that in general we've had quite a few candidates email us, and so I just want to toss this question out here for you. So we've had candidates who have asked us about what they should state in regards to the years of professional experience to put down. And so within their profile, they can put down 1 or 2 years, 2 to 4 years, 4 to 6, I do believe. And so we've had quite a few candidates who put down 2 to 4 years of professional experience. So I just wanted to get you all's advice in regards to how to navigate that, given that many students are coming straight out of graduate school, and so if they didn't, you know, work between undergrad and grad school, how should they navigate that? So how should they put down, you know, 1 to 2 years professional experience if all their experience is just solely from a graduate program, or should they put down 2 or more if they actually have that within grad school?
So for me, as somebody who is, you know, part of All Director Search right now, is generally, if you're straight out of grad school, you're going to be looking for an entry-level position, and there's not an expectation that you have professional experience going into that position. And so I think of things in like 2 realms. I think that I think of things as professional experience and graduate experience, and both are meaningful in their own ways. But for me, and doing an entry-level, being somebody who's reviewing resumes for an entry-level position, I don't look so much for the like 2 to 4 years of experience, but I know that our position description says like 0 because it's an entry-level position. And so I know, like, for me, there's, like, I felt this anxiety of, like, oh, well, like, I have this graduate experience, and that was meaningful, and it is meaningful, and I loved it. But when I'm looking at professional positions, I think of things in terms of, like, post-master's work, pre-master's, post-master's. And so there is professional work that happens, like, maybe if you took a break between undergraduate and graduate school, and so I think that counts differently in my mind. But if it's an entry-level position, don't feel like you need to have 2 to 4 years of experience in order to apply for it. I don't know if Kendra, Jen, if you have other thoughts.
So real quick,
I think.
I just wanted to follow up with Sam real quick. One question. So in that case, let's say you have a candidate who has 2 years of grad experience. Should they or should they not put that down as the professional experience if there is no area for them to select graduate experience? I know, like, I've seen, like, okay, no? Okay.
I would go, yeah. That's two different
I
things.
think it's pretty common standard practice, not only within our field, but within human resources, that graduate time is a half a year. So when you have 2 years of graduate experience, it's actually only technically 1 year of full-time experience. And I think that that's pretty standard across the board when you talk to at least public institutions about what experience looks like. And I'll say, like, people who are putting in, because I just went through the TPE site for the first time last night, I missed a ton of great candidates because they put 2 to 4 years experience. And I don't want somebody that has been working professionally for 2 years necessarily in my entry-level position. I want people straight out of grad school. So I think there's the opportunity to be missed if you're counting your grad experience as professional experience, because you're still a student and you need to take that into account when you're putting in not a professional position.
And that's not to say that your graduate experience wasn't meaningful. It was meaningful, and it meant something, and it means something. But I think of, like, when you look at assistant director and above positions, they say like 3 to 5 years postmasters. And so I think that for me, that's another thing that delineates it for me is as you go up and move through student affairs, it's going to start saying X amount of years postmasters. And so that's just another reason why I have the lens that I do.
I know a number of folks who actually worked professionally in between their undergrad experience and their graduate school. And if you worked 40 hours professionally, I think then you can say that you did that. I do think you need to delineate that. My number one piece of advice is don't lie or misrepresent, because again, if I'm going to see your resume, if I'm going to see your cover letter, I'm going to ask you about that. And so if you tell me, oh, I've been working 4 years professionally, okay, great. So, to me that says that you have had certain experiences. And so when I ask you about those experiences, if then in that interview it becomes pretty apparent or clear that that's not actually what happened, it's going to throw everything else kind of into question. And at the end of the day, you're only as good as your word, and you're only as good as your name. And so that is definitely something to think about.
All right, so we have about 5 more minutes. We have quite a few more questions rolling in, so I'm going to hop to the next question. Keep in mind that if we do not get a chance to answer your question here, then you can go ahead and direct those questions to candidates at theplacementexchange.org, which is right there on the screen, and we can answer those questions for you later on today. But the next question that we do have is from Griffin, and their question is, they just want to know, they are asking for you all to identify additional tips on networking in general at TPE.
One of my big fears, and I was actually just doing lunch with a fellow introvert to prepare for this, and she mentioned that her biggest concern as an introvert is the networking piece. And so when she and I were having that conversation, I asked, well, how do you go about your networking? Are you just walking up to random people? Because that can be awkward no matter who you are. But, for me, one of the big things that I utilize is I have a lot of extrovert friends. So I may seek them out, and then they're really great at introducing me to other people. And, again, once I get that one introduction, I'm good at that one-on-one conversation. And so I highly recommend that. And if there's somebody you really want to get to know or you're really interested in, and you're not quite so sure somebody at that institution, or if you're like, hey, I really am interested in, let's just go crazy and say, I'm really interested in Florida State. It's okay to go up to the Florida State table and strike up a conversation about why you would be interested. But again, I think, a wingman finding, wing person, finding that friend to help out is, to me, the introvert dream.
All right. So Cameron wants to know if we want to follow up with you about further questions, where's the best way to get in contact with you? For the facility.
Can you say that one more time, please?
So Cameron just wants to know if he or if they want to follow up with you about further questions, what's the best way to get in contact with you? He was referring to the facilitators in particular.
Yeah, fantastic. I would say, you're always more than welcome to email me at my professional email address. You can find that on the fsu.edu website. If you search housing, look for me, you'll find me. I would also say I'm somewhat on Twitter, not especially great at the social media piece, but if you want to see me, I'm at Twitter. I'm at Bumpus Kendra, and there's a picture of me with Florida State in the background.
Yeah, and you're more than welcome to email me as well. You can find my email address at housing.vcu.edu. I think that there's a staff section, and I should be there. I hope I'm there. I work here.
And the Purdue website's sometimes a little difficult to manage when it comes to directory stuff, so it's my last name and 0, so Bannon0 at purdue.edu. Bannon is with a B. It's like the Dan and yogurt, just B is for boy. So feel free to email me. I'm happy to respond.
All right, and then Myra wants to know, I've been told I come off as shy during job interviews, even though I try to be more outspoken during them. Do you have advice on how to overcome this?
My opinion is nothing says confidence like a good handshake. And so I know, like, for me, if I come in and say, hi, welcome, I'm Samantha, it's nice to meet you, and that person's got a good handshake, we're off to a great start. And when I feel like I have, like, I'm like, that was solid, I feel more confident, and I know, like, this is so silly, but, like, that's how I feel. And I also think it is, like, volume and tone, because sometimes I'm in an interview and I'm like, I can't hear what you're saying. So I think volume and tone are also things that play a part in that.
I personally,
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I personally love when candidates are honest with me and are self-aware enough to acknowledge, like, there are times when I come across as shy, and here's how I combat that in my position, or here are the ways that I'm perceived, some of the misperceptions from me about people, and here are some of the things that are real about me. I have a big heart for people who are incredibly self-aware. I think that's a key and a cornerstone in this profession to be successful. So I think knowing that and identifying it, but also talking about how you overcome that shyness or the perceived shyness when you're interacting with people in a new job or with your students or whatever else it might be.
One piece that I would say is I also tend to own it. If you have ever met me in real life, you would probably hear me say, hi, I'm Kendra. I'm a little awkward. Maybe not straight out the gate. That may not be your starting point when you are interviewing, but again, I think, just like Jen was saying, if you can have that self-awareness and say, yeah, I've been told I can be a little awkward. I try to make a joke to lighten the mood. Or if you're me, I try to make a joke, but only I tend to laugh at those. So a little bit of humor goes a long way, I think. But also understanding that there's nothing inherently wrong with being shy. It's okay to be shy. It's not okay to let your shyness impede you. And so simply, having that confidence in yourself and your abilities, and knowing that you're worth somebody's time. Again, as Samantha said, go up, shake their hand, say hi. If you can find a way in which you can relate to that person, I went to your session and I thought it was really great. That's a great opening if you're at NASPA. If you go to the social at TPE, hey, I had a really great interview. I wanted to make sure I stopped by and said hi. That's a great opening line.
All right, so we have one more question from Brittany, and so her question is, introverts tend to pick up on body language well. when employers have scattered eye contact and it bugs us introverts, what do you recommend in combating that?
That is a great question. For me, one of the things that I tend to try to do is if you don't feel like you're getting good eye contact from one of the interviewers, focus a little bit more on the other one. It could be that that interviewer got a work email or a personal text, and it could definitely not be about you. So also keep that in your head. You know, oh, I wonder what's going on. I hope that person's okay. I hope would be one of your first thoughts, not, oh my gosh, I must be doing awful. They won't even look at me. Also know that sometimes, again, as interviewers, sometimes we haven't been able to space ourselves out appropriately, something I think we all need to work on. But again, I wouldn't take it personally, and if it's really bothering you, I always say I'm a bit of a note taker, and start taking some notes on how that conversation, the content, how that's going, what that means, what you're getting out of it, and that probably will take a little bit of your concentration off of the person who can't get it together to interview you.
Great. Thank you. And so, with that being said, that pretty much concludes the presentation for today. But do join us next time for some of the upcoming webinar presentations coming up. So researching institutions, finding the best fit. We also have another TPE candidate Q&A session coming up on the 23rd of February. And then we have pre-TPE on-site event interviewing tips and tricks. So yeah, so if you haven't signed up yet, we encourage you to sign up for TPE Onsite, which will be taking place in San Antonio, Texas, between March 8th and through 12th, 2017. For more information, you can log on to our webpage, www.theplacementexchange.org, for additional details. And also, for those of you who will be on site and you're looking to maybe volunteer, as I mentioned before, one thing that I did to kind of challenge myself was to step outside of my box. And so you could do the same thing, challenge yourself to step outside of your box as an introvert and volunteer. And so this is like one of the really cool ways to really get a chance to deal with some of the employers as well as some of the candidates. You can do various tasks such as deliver mail or maybe serve as a point person at one of our solution stations to help people navigate the space, which is a large hall. So if you're interested, you can log on to our website for more details about that as well. And so with that being said, that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank our facilitators today, Kendra, Sam, and Jim. And with that being said, that's the conclusion of today's presentation. Also keep in mind that if for some reason, if you missed something, or if you know a colleague who was not able to attend today's webinar, it will be available on YouTube within the week. So encourage them to log on to our channel on YouTube to check that out. For any additional questions you might have, go ahead and send those questions to the TPE Candidate Development email, and we will answer those as soon as possible. So with that being said, have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.